are listening to Inside Voices on WNHHLP 103.5 FM. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Inside Voices. And Inside Voices is a newer show on 103.5 WNHH, and we are so grateful to have the opportunity to have this platform. Inside Voices will examine the childcare system, examining the historical context that created the current system, and discuss how U.S. policies and legislation steeped in racial animus led to the current crisis. We will have guests from Connecticut and around the country who are at the forefront of shaping today's legislation and policies to create a more equitable childcare system, as well as the providers and the parents who deliver and access care every day. Inside Voices has long been a vision of Circle, but this could not have been possible without our beloved friend, Tom Ficklin, who created a platform on his show to give voices to this issue. And now we have our own platform, and we are so grateful to have with us today two women who, one is very well known in New Haven, Ms. Kim Harris, who is the co-founder of Circle. And Circle is really the organization that will be leading this conversation through Inside Voices. And with us as well is Tammy Robinson, who is our fearless leader of Circle. And for those who don't know, I co-founded Circle along with Kim Harris. So usually at this time, I do some sort of like a historical context about the childcare system. But this time, I think what we're going to do is talk about the historical context of Circle so that people can understand why this conversation is so important and why we felt it was important to create a platform to have these conversations. So let's start where we always start when we have these conversations in our community, Kim. And I don't know if you remember first of all, what was it that caused you to end up at the Graustein Foundation on that particular day? And for the audience, I want to share every month we had a meeting. The early childhood community would come together at the Graustein building, and we would have conversations about policies and legislation that affected the childcare industry. And so we had a particular meeting on that day, Kim, and I remember why I ended up at Graustein that day. And Kim, I want you to share about how you ended up and how Circle actually gave birth from that. So for that meeting, it was a snowy day, so I'll start there. So Kim, how did you end up there?
So first of all, Georgia, thank you for having me to kick off or launch, the Inside Voices.
Yes, Kim.
Yes, and then I want to say that on that day I didn't get the email. Okay, and of course I'm calling you. I'm like, okay, where are we? What floor are we going on? What's happening? So I ended up at Grousing because they had moved the meeting to another location. And of course, my digital skills were not where I would have wanted them to be. So I didn't get the email. I didn't check in like I should have. And so I ended up there. You told me, I'm pulling in. I said, okay, I'm pulling in too. So as well.
We both didn't get
That's right. If both of us did not get the email. That's because we wanted to be on time. We wanted to be there. We wanted to show it good. And we knew that there was a special guest that was going to be happening on that day. So we get there, and the room was empty. I'm like, wait a minute. Check your calendar, Georgia, because my calendar, I left it in the car. And we found out we were right day, right time, wrong space.
Yeah.
I said, okay. Made a few phone calls. The security guard came up because we were not supposed to be there.
Well, it was actually Dave Martin from the foundation.
Dave, that's right. He's like, oh no, the meeting was moved. So we ended up listening. They set it up for us so that we didn't have to travel over to I think it was at ACES. Is that where they moved it to?
No, they moved it online because there was a snowstorm, so they moved it online.
So, first of all, let me say this about snowstorms and things that we have to do no matter what,
Mhm.
right? It snowed, we're in Connecticut, but we had to go. We
Yeah,
had to be there. And that's kind of like the story of like how we do things in the black and brown community. It doesn't matter. We have to go, we have to be there because it's too costly not to be there.
yeah,
So we were there, we went, and they set it up. We had our own spacious space, and pretty much the rest was history. We got a chance to hear from one of the leading educators in early child care and education. So that's how we ended up and that conversation. And it was great because we got a chance to have some private moments and
yes,
to really, really talk without, you know, being cautious about what we were going to say and how we were going to say it. Because sometimes in the room, you have to look around and say, oh, is this appropriate to say?
mhm,
I don't want to step on too many toes.
mhm,
Mind you, I don't mind my toes getting stepped on because that's how I grow, that's how I learn. But still, when you're in the room with others, you have to sometimes be mindful of that conversation. But I'm gonna just say it was all God. It
it
was
was,
nothing but God that just led us to go. We were gonna be there in the room and we were gonna have a conversation among the others that were listening, and we were going to have private conversations, and we were going to have a meeting. Also, we brought Dave into the conversation, so
yeah.
it was just a godly moment. It was really a godly moment.
It was, and it was important for us to be there, Kim, because Dr. Walter Gilliam had just published his study on out of school suspension of Black and brown boys, right? And, he was doing the rounds and presenting to folks about what was actually happening with our Black and brown boys in pre-K that were being suspended at disproportionate levels out of school. And I think it's so important what you said, Kim, about the fact that it was important for us to have that room with just Dave being there. And Dave Martin is and Tammy, what's his official title like Graustein? Is
You know,
like
I don't know what it is at the moment, but Dave is our program manager.
he's a program manager. So it was at a time where we were talking about how Black and brown boys were, being disenfranchised as early as age 3. And to be in that room without the full normal group and to be online. And I remember typing in the question to Dr. Gilliam, is this racially motivated? And you and I, Kim, we know as people of color, the answer. And Dr. Gilliam, so gracious as he was, said, I'm not prepared to say that. And his subsequent conversation on implicit bias did affirm what we as people of color always know. And again, we know this because the history of childcare is steeped in this racial animus. And I think people don't always understand how they perpetuate the system, how they are, accomplices in the system. And sometimes people aren't aware of how they actually, cause harm to folks in the system. And Kim, a part of our conversation with Dave was talking about how we have, dealt with the harm in the system. Even though childcare has all these issues, people of color experience that in very unique ways. And so this was also at the time when Graustein was really thinking to make a change,
Mm,
the type of work that they were going to fund. And Dave, said, we're looking to change. We want to fix things like this in the system. And part of the issue and the barrier was the childcare industry itself, the way that it was structured. But we had a really wonderful conversation, Kim, and we landed at a particular place. And um, we just decided, lots of childcare centers need resources to help those children that we're serving. And the only way that we can access those resources are through different types of philanthropic efforts, and just also the different ways that the Office of Early Child Education fund or allow funds to come down into the community. And one of the big barrier was the structure of childcare industries. They were for profit. Many were small family childcare providers, and we just basically said we need a structure. Hope for New Haven, which is the organization now that manages or is a fiscal sponsor for Circle. We were the only nonprofit in the space, and so we decided that we were going to organize. And Kim, I mean, you've been in this work for generation generation. And so, to the extent that you had an even longer historical lens for me, and we shared it the last time, Kim, that you came on just the view that your parents had, your mom and your auntie had about how to do this work. And for those folks who didn't catch the first show that we did, can you just give some sort of like context of the thinking, and that thinking also informed how we were going to move forward with Circle. But just share with the audience the thinking about how your aunt and mother approached this work around childcare.
So, George, just before I go into that, I think it should be said about being in the room and why this motion, this method came about. And a lot of times, we're not in the room because we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And we had this big, huge learning curve that we had to overcome, right? When it comes to Harvard, sitting up in the rooms with all the politicians, they had the power of the pen. We weren't in those rooms, so we didn't know. We didn't know.
And we're still not in those rooms because when we go, we're still
There's not that many of us.
out on our hands.
That's right. It's not that
People
many of
of
us.
color that's there. So it really hasn't changed.
But we know. Now, do we not know? We now know, so that if it doesn't happen, well, let me flip it. In order for it to happen, with the knowledge that we have to now move on that knowledge so that we can grow the knowledge and grow the base of who we are so that we can move forward. Now, in terms of the view, like my mom and my auntie, Harrison Tucker, I wish they were living so that they can see like the transformation of what has happened along the way. I know they never envisioned an Obama, a Black president. They never envisioned that happening. Just so many things have occurred since their passing. And I know that for us over here, they always look to fly under the radar. They didn't want to attract any negative anything. They just wanted to educate the kids. And in saying that, not in a bad way, they didn't want any of the noise to get in front of or around what they felt was best for the kids that we served. And they knew that if we were to take on politicians, how things are in the world, where we wanted to move, that it was going to be a lot of noise. And they didn't want that. They wanted to move at their pace. They wanted to educate the way they wanted to educate. They didn't want people coming in, because there were people that came in and told them, well, I don't know. And you had that, come to you as well. You're not a quality childcare facility. We have some of the best doctors, lawyers, judges that have graduated from Harrison Tucker, and, second to none. So we know that we both have proven methods of moving things forward. So we are 55 years old, Harrison Tucker, and I hope we can live for another 55. We have enough in the family to make those things happen. As a matter of fact, my great niece, she can see 100 years if she continues to do what she's doing right now. She's 12, getting ready to be 13. And she loves being in this business. She loves the fact that she's in charge of sweeping the kitchen or doing those things. But in terms of my mother and my auntie, they really came along because life in the work world was hard. And there weren't a lot of options, not a lot of chances for them to really grow. And one day, my auntie's boss said the wrong thing to her at the wrong time. And that was it. That was it. She came to my mom and she said, you know what? I'm going to give them 2 weeks notice. We're going to go in business. And she laid it on my mom. It's your choice. Do you want to do senior citizens or do you want to do kids? My mother said, let's do kids because we'll stay young forever. So they went into daycare at the time, and just not knowing where it was going to go. I mean, they started with 3 and 4 year olds, then they moved to infants and toddlers. We even had a school K to 12. No, actually K to 8, and it kept on going. And they were the first Black in the neighborhood to own their own space. There were some other Black childcare providers, but they didn't own it. They were either working for a church or for somebody else. So yeah, just a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom. And as time goes on, I want to just really say this. I want to emphasize this. And this is why we're pouring so much into my niece and my great niece, because my mother and my auntie, they thought they were going to live forever. They really did. They were young, they were vibrant, they were happening. But it is up on us to make sure that we're passing this knowledge on. We have to, or else it doesn't live forever. You know, George, you and I have these conversations all the time about resting on our laurels. We cannot rest on our laurels. We cannot rest on what was in the past,
Yeah.
because I have now seen the cycle of things change. Ever since I was a kid, I don't know. I was born into this business, and I have seen it change so many times. And as we even go through our accreditation, this is like our third round of accreditations, and all 3 times it has changed. We haven't had like a settling of how it's going to go, but we have to pass knowledge on, even as we're learning how to work the power of the pen. We have to pass it on. We have to be able to figure out, are we going to go for it, or are we going to sell the business? So
Yeah.
those are the things that have to happen in our scope of who we are. But if we're in it, we're going to be in it to win it, and we're going to really try to just elevate who we are, what we are, and the cause.
Yeah.
Have to.
And I think that's so important, Kim, because part of what our conversation is going to be again is that childcare was the first industry for Black women in America,
Yes.
in addition to being on the plantation. And for a lot of people who don't know, the after the emancipation of slaves, many Black women had to go into childcare because there was not a lot of options of where they could work. And there were a lot of white women who, and I think the white society at large was worried about the loss of African American laborers, right? And so childcare was that natural entree into a paid gig for many women of color. And this is why historically, this is the only part of the educational system where Black women or women of color not predominate, but they make up a large portion of it. And for many of those women, like your mom and your auntie, this has been a way for them to, one, take ownership of their life and ownership of their community and to build generational wealth. So to the point that, this Harrison Tucker, outlived them and is now transforming even the way that New Hallville is going. And that was what we wanted for our community, right? And so, Tammy, this is where you came in, right? And so we had this very big idea about the fact that we cannot continue to let our Black and brown children just languish in a system that's really doing harm to them. And we have to create an organization that can address the fact that many of these Black and brown children are being cared for in communities of color, are being cared for primarily by people of color, but they lack the resources that they need to serve them really very well. And how do we bring those resources in when the structure of our organization does not lend itself to do that? So we landed upon Circle. And Tammy, we sort of like roped you in to our to
It
our
was a bit of a rodeo.
right. So Kim and I, we were busy running organizations already, and we knew that this work could not be done by us because we were struggling so much we didn't even see the email that the meeting had changed location. So Tammy, we kind of roped you in, and I want to introduce you to Tammy Robinson. And full disclosure, Tammy is my sister as well, and we are making this our family business in a way that Harrison Tucker is making this their family business. So Tammy, I will allow you to share who you are and how you got roped in to this work.
Well, thank you, Georgia. And it's always wonderful to sit in company with you and Kim. the brain power is it's wonderful to just to see it from a distance and to be a part of it. And I think, I had just had my second child, my second son, and I had previously spent 10 years in Maryland. Um, Moved back to Connecticut, and I think you asked me to just tag along to this meeting just to kind of check it out and see what's what. And I have no background other than being a mother at the time. I had no background in education or childcare or any of that. And so I went to that meeting and I saw a lot of the things that, Kim had mentioned about, looking around a room and feeling comfortable enough to speak your truth. And in certain places, you aren't able to do that. And I was asked by you at that point to, help this thing called Circle, this idea that you and Kim had come to life. But, I didn't realize how much until much later on into the work, childcare allowed me to be there for you guys when you needed it. Because I had started my professional career at Verizon in Connecticut, but I moved to Maryland because my husband went to law school in Baltimore. And so I was a new mom in a new town, and I happened to find a family childcare provider to take care of my firstborn son. And that provider was literally around the corner from where we lived. So the full circle is I would not have gotten the experience that I had in corporate America that allowed me to have some of the skills to, jump on board and take my knowledge and contribute to what you and Kim have done for so many years in the childcare space. If I didn't have access to that family childcare provider some 20 odd years ago, because I wouldn't have had the wonderful experience I had working at Verizon and then later at Sega of America in San Francisco. But that was the genesis of my entree into the early childhood space and learning about what teachers do in the classroom and how much of an importance it is to capture a child's imagination and an inspiration to learn at those early years. And so, this is something I've seen in other children as well as my own. And I can't imagine doing work that is any more important than I've been doing for the last 10 years at Circle.
Tammy, I don't know if Georgia ever told you this, right? When we were thinking about this, I said, Georgia, that's because we're so used to doing everything once again. I said, Georgia, we can do this. Let's just do it. We don't got to bring anybody else in. Let's just go ahead and do it and make it happen. She's like, Kim, no. If we're going to make this thing happen, if we're going to elevate it, we can't do it. We got to bring somebody else in. Said we already are working 17 hours a day.
Yeah.
When are we going to sleep?
Did she tell you, well, it's 17 hours a day. There's 7 hours left in the day.
That's what I said.
Kim has 30 hours. I have 24.
The rest of us have
So Kim can find all of those extra hours. But I was clear, I was at my capacity. Even our ability to leave our facilities to go to these meetings that were so critical because these things were occurring all along. I knew my bandwidth just could not do this and could not do this well. And I was lucky that Tammy's son had turned 3 because you were a stay-at-home mom with your son. And so I think you are one of those families that we don't often talk about in the system because the childcare system or the early care system really focus on childcare rather than early education.
Yeah.
And that there are lots of stay-at-home moms of all different colors. And it's not just, it is a privileged position, yes, but it's not solely a privileged position. It's also a cultural value that, folks stay at home with their children as long as they can. So your Duncan just turned 3 and he was going in childcare and you had some free time.
I did. I had some me time to share with folks. And yeah, and you know, it started kind of as a whirlwind. There's so many. I come from a space where there are a lot of, I thought there were a lot of acronyms, but there are so many acronyms in early childcare and so much to learn. But you know, it was well worth it because the children that you guys as educators are spending your days with, you know, they are benefiting so much from the work that you're able to do with them in the classroom. And I've been at the daycare center at Hope Child Development Center, and I've seen kids go from the newborn room all the way up, you know, to to now they're coming by for the summer program because they're in school in eighth grade or something. So it's amazing to see the development that happens from classroom to classroom and then onto the schools, the K through 12 system, and the impact those early years have on children as they grow.
So, Tammy, as you're talking about the work that you do, so can you talk about what are some specific work that Circle is doing in the community and how that supports and undergirds childcare, providers within our Circle network?
Yeah, so we started in 2014 with a survey, and we actually surveyed about 2,000 early childcare providers in the state and asked them, what do you need? We had a sense of what folks needed, but we wanted to be sure. So we got the data, and the data was clear. We need qualified staff. And for us, you know, that what that might mean to some people is, hey, we need people with a bachelor's degree or people with an associate's degree. But the information, the lived experience that you and Kim had explained the story a lot better. You needed people who were not just qualified in college, in a college setting, but also qualified to do the work in the classroom. And for us, we thought the best approach to addressing that issue was to supplement what was happening in the field with an apprenticeship program. So we started looking at recruiting individuals, working with our, you know, local agencies around employment and finding people who had lived experiences with the young folks that we wanted to touch the most. So we started or began our apprenticeship program again right out the bat, 2014, and we started to realize that through that program we were able to impact providers in the community. And then the next thing we worked on was, hey, we've got some folks in our network, so let's formalize our network. And then we created what we call Circle Collab, which is the network of providers that we cultivated through the last 10 years and have grown direct relationships with about 30 or so providers running 38 organizations across the state, 3 counties in the state right now. And, you know, they have been able to benefit from the apprenticeship program as well as other programs in New Haven. And we've really thought about what was meaningful to these providers and delivering those meaningful services to them. And one of the things we were able to do during the pandemic was to allow family childcare providers to tap into some of the resources that we had, not only with our banking agent, Webster Bank, but also with our vendor, Staples. And we were able to, during the height of the pandemic, when folks couldn't get access to paper products, we were able to tap into those existing resources that we had at a business level and bring through a shared service model monthly supplies to our providers where they can, you know, offset, you know, not even think about the cost of what it means to get, you know, all the paper products they need in their classroom, and they can reinvest that money into their program, into their business, and use those resources in other ways. So those were some of the things that we were doing.
I'm going to pause here because I think in order for you to, I want this to be the backdrop, because for early care and education or any business, you're either going to increase revenue to be successful or decrease expenses.
Yeah.
Well, for many of us, there's no opportunity to decrease expensive. I mean, if I always say this, if the last thing we had left to cut was our wrist because we had cut so much to the bones that there was nothing left to cut. So the only way we could think about doing things is bring resources in, additional revenue in. But again, that rub between what parents can afford and what it costs, the cost of care, we could not ask our parents to pay even more. So the shared services model was a way for us, again, to leverage our relationship with large, like a vendor like Staple, who during the pandemic, by the way, was not taking on
Clients, yeah.
new clients. And so we were able to leverage that relationship to, again, as you say, purchase in bulk, which ultimately reduce the individual cost of the product. But by us donating, well, not donating, but making these products available to the providers, that saved them. How much is it saving them a year?
Well, the number we've used or we'd calculated was around 1,200 pre-inflation. And so now we think it's more like $1,500 a year in savings just from the monthly supplies.
Yeah. So, and what are some other things that you guys did over the years? I do want to talk about what we're getting ready to do, but talk about some of in addition to the Circle Collab and the apprenticeship program, what were some of the other ventures, initiative that you undertook?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things we were able to undertake was, growing the size of our network and then relying on that network and the resources that they needed or wanted to tap into to kind of drive the way we approach our work. And a part of the impetus for us calling our network Circle Collab is to drive home the point that this is collaborative work. We're not just, cultivating membership and meeting and gathering together and talking about these issues. We're actually saying to our members, what do you want us to do next as an organization? And so we've been able to solicit from our network members ideas around how to drive our programming. So one of the main, I think, or one of the more important recent initiatives that we've taken on is acting as an intermediary, serving as an intermediary for the Office of Early Childhood for its what is now called Early Start, but they had introduced it a couple of years ago as an infant toddler expansion grant. And so we serve about nine, I think I'm sorry, eight now. We started with 9 family childcare providers and group home programs where we were acting as an intermediary between them and the OEC to assist them with infant and toddler slots. So they were able to bring in more resources to their program through this program. And for the first time, I think the family childcare providers were actually able to receive funding, state funding. So between us and the other program in Hartford, we were the only 2 programs in the state that engaged in the OEC with this endeavor 2 years ago. And we've seen tremendous growth, personal growth, individual growth for our members by them being able to access and tap into those funding programs that had previously not been, eligible. They had not been eligible for.
Yeah. And Tammy, these are all such important programs that Inside Voices will create the platform to discuss in detail some of these things, because I don't think we can talk about the impact of some of those initiatives on the bottom line of providers and by extension parents without like giving it its entire time. So this is just to kind of set the framework and the backdrop for those conversations. So Kim, you are about to launch your apprenticeship program, and Circle has been doing apprenticeship, and we have, and dare I say it, and I am going to say it,
Uh-oh.
the Office of Early Childhood, kicking and screaming to the apprenticeship table. And it took us a while to get them there. And after the pandemic hit, and people are starting to look at, ways to innovate, we were really very grateful that the governor understood that apprenticeship was going to be, had to be a pathway to address the workforce pipeline for early care and education. And so, with the governor's leadership during the pandemic, the Office of Early Childhood Education, which you're going to hear as abbreviated as OEC, they finally came on board to do apprenticeship. And so they launched their apprenticeship program, or they started their apprenticeship program that they created this year. I think they've launched it. And we have been doing work, Circle has been doing workforce development work for quite a while in this space. And we have actually led in the creation of center-based apprenticeship. And Kim, you are going to be among the first to launch your apprenticeship using the Circle apprenticeship framework for your business. So, how are you feeling about that?
I'm feeling great. Our nonprofit, Inspired Communities, we were doing some job training, right? Because we were looking at how we can train people in the community to come on board and work in the community with children as mentors, paid mentors. So what we found out, and this was hard, it takes more than just 6 weeks of training to really, really fortify someone to go in and work with kids or to work with the community or to work with parents. So that's my gratefulness in all this, that we really get a chance to train a few people from the neighborhood. Our hope is that we can train a few people from the neighborhood. We've been advertising, got it out there, and they will come on board and learn this business. So they'll be in the neighborhood, in the child care facility, and they're going to learn. They're going to learn what this whole early care and educational piece is all about. And we hope that as time goes on, they're not only learning different models of how it is that it can work, but they can grow themselves. They can grow themselves, and everybody can be a better person from this. Because once again, a lot of times things are lacking because we don't have access, that inroad, that pathway to being educated. Whether it's time, I don't have the funding, I'm raising my family, it's hard. But the paid apprenticeship program is a game changer. It is really a game changer. To be able to come in and work for a year plus, get a certificate, grow yourselves, be around like-minded people, it's huge. It is so huge. And, like, I'm just going to repeat this again. Not only is it huge to the person who's going to be on board doing it, but it's huge to my community and to any community that's going to make this thing happen.
And I think it's important to highlight the city of New Haven at this point.
Yeah.
As Tammy, you are facilitating conversation with folks in different cities, and you live in Hampden, and you do a lot of work now with the folks. We're starting to establish that relationship with folks in Hampden. We're starting to establish relationship with folks in West Haven as well. But I think this is where we kind of have to shout out the city of New Haven, shout out Mayor Justin Elicker, and shout out the Economic Development Office, first under Dr. Dalal and now under Eliza Halsey, and shout out the Board of Alders, because we are doing something in New Haven that many communities are not doing. So Tammy, Kim's mentioned the fact that this is a paid apprenticeship.
Yeah.
So you had the lens of when we started apprenticeship first.
Yeah.
And now what
it was unpaid, unfortunately.
And people are working for a year, and I keep working for a year without being paid. And so, can you talk about that initiative and how Circle is supported, along with the city of New Haven, is
Yeah.
supported the launch of this apprenticeship program with Kim Harris and
Tyshell Gore at the Learning Center in Hamden.
her in Hamden. So can you talk about how the city is instrumental in making that happen?
Yeah, so through the pandemic, the city received some funding, some ARPA funding, and I think they set aside $3.1 million specifically. They again, to shout out Mayor Elicker. Mayor Elicker often shouts me out, so I get the opportunity to shout him out in public now, so I feel good about that. But he actually went out into the community, and I know Kim, you and your folks participated in those sessions in the community where the mayor wanted to know, how did you want us community to spend this money, and how did you want this money to be reflected and impacted upon your community? And folks said, we need help around childcare. And so the mayor and his team set aside $3.1 million for this effort, and Circle, along with other folks in the community, stepped up to say we can do some things, and we were fortunate enough to be awarded $1.6 million to address the issues of workforce. And since we had been working on an apprenticeship program for early childhood education for 10 years in New Haven, I think that work impressed upon the folks at the city, what Circle could bring, the insight Circle could bring to this space and how this money could be used. And so we just closed out our second year of the grant at the end of January.
So we're managing $1.6 million on behalf of the city.
On behalf of the city, yes. So we are working with the city to get this money out into the community, into places in the community where they haven't necessarily gone before. And so we just closed out, as I mentioned, our second year of the grant, and we will be getting funding out to family childcare providers, folks who are also have done years of workforce development themselves in different parts of the city. And that money, we've seen that money being used to bring folks on, to kind of cover that initial cost of bringing someone on, which is so important for a business, especially in our business where the margins are really razor thin. And so that little jump start to help someone start their career and help offset some costs for a business allows some breathing room for everybody, right? To get in, to get to do the job, to understand the job, and then to move on and to progress in the work. And then we've also supported many educators through our grantees have been able to receive their CDAs, which is the Child Development Associate Certificate. And they, some of the other providers are able to, help their existing staff. So this was funding to help the workforce to develop. And it wasn't, I think we weren't sure what to expect because we've never been grant administrators before, but we weren't sure what the community was going to come back to us and say they needed. But we were able to fund some wonderful projects in the first year. And we're about to make some announcements about the second year funding. And one of the areas that we recognized was once the OEC announced their apprenticeship program, we really wanted to support those providers in New Haven who were going to be participating in that effort around apprenticeship. And so we encouraged everyone in the city to really think about ways that they could, bring apprenticeship into the fold for them this year through the second year of the grant. And we got some wonderful responses, and we're going to be helping folks to bring to stand up apprenticeship programs within their centers.
So you know what, you're talking about numbers. I want to just quickly talk about the impact of what Circle has done in terms of numbers. So in Newhallville, Dixwell, 48% of our children 5 and under live in poverty, right? Mm-hmm. And Circle, through its training courses, we have been able to train in collaboration 3 teachers that are still with us today because of Circle and everything that's going on there, right? Because of Circle and the funding that has come through, we've been able to collaborate with others, build that relationship with other colleagues within the Circle network. And we've done some programming, whereas we've been able to touch over 200 children within our network for some of our summer program that we're doing. So the dollars are working. The kids are happy, the parents are happy, and they're learning. And they're meeting other people. And just very important on this as well, they're coming back year after year, but they're not coming back alone. They're coming back with friends.
Yeah.
So important, Kim, for you to highlight that because, you know, we're up at the Capitol now and we're talking about, the governor's proposal for universal pre-K. We have a couple of legislation that's moving through that is asking for over $100 million to come into the early care and education space. And part of the conversation that we're going to have is how does that really impact a parent on the ground? We talk about all these big numbers, but a lot of times parents don't always know and understand how those impact them when they have access to it or when they have been locked out of access, right? And for Circle, in the past 5 going on 6 years now, or 5 years, we have been able to bring over $4 million of capital into the Black and Brown communities through Black and Brown providers. So the money has always been there. And we know that the capital, if you have capital investment, if you have resources, that you will be able to do some things, right? And for many legislators, they allocate the funds. And the big question that I always get with the legislators, especially those from the Black and Puerto Rican caucus, is, but we just gave you guys a bunch of money. How is it that you're still telling me that you're not gaining access to these resources, right? Because the money is there, the money comes to the community, but it doesn't always go to the individual providers and the individual families that the money was intended to go to, right? And we have seen that in this space. We have seen how money comes in the door, but it doesn't remain in our community, right? And that was part of the impetus for us to have a circle is how do we stand up an organization that can ensure that those resources are coming into the community. And part of the challenge that we have with the commissioner is that challenge is to say, how do you make sure whether it's the governor's $300 million or Speaker Ritter's $100 million, and the Senate, Senator Looney is also preparing a bill that we don't quite know yet what the dollar amount is going to be. But how do we make sure that whatever that dollar amount is, that what is intended for our children in our community actually gets to the ground and get to the community? And a part of the community conversation is going to be around that. So this is going to be an opportunity for me to talk about some of the things that we are going to do with Inside Voices. So clearly we're going to bring on folks, amazing folks like yourself, Kim. And Kim, you're going to be part of our hosting perform part of our hosting duties, just to make sure that folks know what's going on in the community, and especially around childcare. And Tammy, I know you're thinking this is your one and only time, but sorry, it is not. Because there's going to be such amazing work that Circle is going to be doing. We want to make sure that you're coming and speaking to it. We have invited the commissioner, Beth Bai, for the Office of Early Child Education. She has graciously accepted, and we are going to have her on to talk about the universal pre-K that the governor is proposing. We are going to have folks from around the country, so folks from the National Association for the Education of Young Children, which is the main accreditation body that basically looks at childcare facility to say, hey, this is a high quality facility, or this is a facility that's on its way to being high quality, and just have them come and also give national lens to what's happening across the country. Of course, we're going to have other folks that are doing this work from across the country. And but more specifically, for especially for this year, is just lifting up some of the things that's happening. We've invited the United Way to come and to talk about their work because Circle is managing $1.6 million of the government of the city's 1.3. And United Way is managing the other side of that around facilities, but also around strategic planning. And we want the community to know that there is work happening right now around strategic planning that you all need to be involved in because that work is laying the framework for what early care and education will look like for families. The early care and education system will look like for families in the city of New Haven, as well as what that is going to look like at and how it's going to attract resources from the state. I know the state is put in place its local governance partnership. So we're going to have folks to come and to talk about what that means for parents and how and why that is critically important to whether you have access to infant toddler care in New Haven or not. So those are all important conversations that we are going to have. And again, we are going to be looking to you, Tammy, looking to you, Kim, to help to facilitate these conversations. I think most importantly, we're going to bring on providers as well. Because I think there are lots of parents, when the surveys are going out, the full feedback we get from lots of parents is that they don't know where childcare providers are, who those childcare providers are. So this will be a platform to highlight some of the childcare providers in our community that are doing amazing work. Kim, you talk about Harrison Tucker producing, like
Judges and
page and like judges and all of these things. And sometimes we don't understand like what's actually happening inside of those buildings. And sadly, a lot of parents defer to Facebook and the social media, and only the bad stories are being uplifted in those spaces about what happened in childcare centers. And so this is an opportunity to kind of lift up those high quality programs in New Haven and across the state, so parents will know that that there's this wonderful family childcare provider or center-based provider, after-school provider that's in the community, and they can see and hear from those providers directly. And also parents. That is a voice that is woefully missing from the conversation. Kim, when we go in the room, we do not see people of color, providers of color, and missing from that room, regardless of race and economics. They're not parents in those rooms that are making decisions. And so I think it's important for us to make sure that those voices are being heard. So I will give you guys, Tammy, I'll give you the second to last word, and then Kim, I'll give you the last word before we wrap up.
yeah, I just want to thank you again, Georgia, for doing this. This was, something that we had envisioned about a year and a half ago now, maybe 2 winters ago, I can't remember. But we we didn't quite know how to do this and how to make it happen, and we struggled as an organization to kind of figure out how we were going to create a platform like this. And sometimes you venture out into the world to try to do something, and you're not quite sure how it's going to get done, and miraculously doors just open for you, and because of who you are and your reputation in the city, and the amazing amount that you've contributed to this work, even when it's not always received well, because you push back on the status quo, and that's what I think people appreciate about you ultimately, certainly what I appreciate about you. And you were able to find a space to voice your thoughts out there, and that has birthed into what we have today with WNA I'm bad on these things. WNHA. Did I say that right?
NA.
I'm still messing it up.
No,
So
you're
bad.
doing
See, this
so
is why I shouldn't be on radio shows because I'm not really good at this stuff.
good. And Carrie's given us a 2 minute mark. So
I'm getting the yank. So I'll be quiet and I'll let Kim speak.
Tammy, you did good, girl. Let me tell you. And kudos to you and the sister team. First of all, let me just say that. Just very happy to know you all, to be affiliated. And if nothing else comes out of this, my hope would be two things. One is that we can help people develop systems, right? I can remember going for the accreditation the first time, and the feedback was, "Oh, you don't have enough systems." I'm like, "What? I don't have enough systems? I wake up in the morning, I do my job, I'm here 14 hours a day." But it's more to it than that. And once again, people don't know. So if we can help people develop systems so that they can become more effective in how their businesses are running, that would be great. And then number two, no matter how you do it, you can't get around relationship building.
yeah.
How do we help people develop those relationships, whether it's based on, the resources, it's basically based on the need, and then how do we take that and pay it forward, pass it on so that somebody else can get it. Relationship and systems. If we can just really hone in on those things, that's my mantra, is to really work towards those things so that I can help somebody else build systems and develop those relationships and resources so that, their legacies can live on forever. And George, I'm gonna pass it back to you, girl.
That's
Well, for me, the most important thing is lifting up the voice of the voiceless. And in those spaces where I can channel those voices, we'll always do that. I am so grateful to WNHH for creating a platform for these voiceless folks in the system. And so, with that, I am just going to thank you all again. I look forward to these conversations. I think it's going to be enlightening for the community to understand the system that touches so many of us. There is a reason why the governor is proposing this
Mm.
big initiative, because it impacts so many in the community. But that is where the opportunity lies, as well as the danger for our community, because we know once resources starts to come in, then that's it. So with that, goodbye, y'all, and we'll see you later in our conversation.
Bye.